Student-centered coaching focuses on setting standards-based learning goals to improve student achievement. Throughout their collaborative partnership, the coach and teacher focus on collecting student evidence to build on students' current understanding and make informed instructional decisions, advancing all students towards the learning goal. The coach and teacher set intentional learning goals during their planning process and identify ways they will work together to help students meet the desired outcomes. During today's planning session, the teacher and coach plan a math flip, an interactive visual math routine with a specific standards-based learning goal in mind. Today's goal is exploring the commutative property of multiplication with students. As they plan, they ensure that each student has an entry point into the task. They anticipate student responses, practice how they will record student thinking to help students make connections between representations, and develop questions that will support students during productive struggle. The coach and teacher purposely select talk moves to enhance the mathematical discourse.
Today we're going to do a coaching session focusing on a number sense routine. We'll be focusing on Alabama Content Standard number 1, illustrate the product of two whole numbers as equal groups by identifying the number of groups and the number in each group and represent as a written expression. Number 5, develop and apply properties of operations as strategies to multiply and divide. Number 7, use strategies based on properties and patterns of multiplication to demonstrate fluency with multiplication and division within 100. So thinking about the number sense routines that we want to use in the classroom, thinking about where your students are in multiplication, what would you think about using a math flip?
I think a math flip would be a great next step for my students. This will give them opportunities to share strategies that will help them continue building their mental math models for multiplication.
Importantly, the coach and teacher will also plan for ways in which they can gather evidence of student understanding that will inform their instructional practices. As part of the planning process, the teacher and coach will select coaching moves that best serve the students and the teacher. By allowing the teacher to select and clearly define both her and the coach's role, it strengthens the effectiveness of the partnership and builds an even stronger, trusting relationship between the coach and teacher.
So we've worked together a lot already. How would you like me to support you during this math flip?
I would like to facilitate this math flip. If you could support me by recording the students' answers, that would be a great help.
I can record that mathematically for you, and if there's a spot where we need to make some clarification with the students, I can always do a think aloud during that time.
Okay, sounds great.
In this coaching session, the coach and teacher have selected the coaching move, Teach in Tandem. This gives the teacher an opportunity to listen to student thinking and pose purposeful questions while the coach scribes the responses on the board. During the lesson, they may share a think aloud, where the coach and the teacher pause to make instructional decisions based on what students are doing and saying in real time.
All right, so looking at our math flip, this is the first one that we have discussed. How do you feel about this one?
I feel like this is a good starting point. Hopefully they'll be able to identify a number of groups with the amount of objects in each group that will push them into a multiplication equation.
Thinking about where your students are, how do you anticipate that they will do on these two?
I anticipate some students will skip count by 2. They may also use repeated addition. Hopefully some students will see 6 groups of 2.
Okay, what about this next one? Do you think that they'll see the connection between A and B?
I think they will be able to identify 2 groups of 6 quickly.
So on this next math flip, the numbers get a little bit larger. Now we have 7 groups of 2. How do you feel that your kids will do on this one?
I feel like initially they will be able to identify the 5 groups of 2 and then connect the additional 2 groups of 2.
And then when we flip it over here,
the same thing, just reversed. They will be able to easily see the 2 groups and then identify the 5 groups with the additional 2.
So looking at part B, how do you think that they're going to connect part B to part A?
I think some students will identify 5 plus 2 and again 5 plus 2, so they will be adding 7 plus 7.
Okay, so you think they're going to do additive. Do you think any kids will do the 7 times 2?
I feel like there will be a few kids that will be able to identify 2 groups of 7.
And what about using parentheses? Do they ever do that when they're making an equation?
No, we have not done parentheses.
Okay, so maybe we can bring that out somehow. So in this image, we're moving to arrays. It is still pushing on equal groups, looking at this line that goes through them. Do you think that they're going to see that as equal groups?
I think that they will see that there are 2 groups of 8 in image A. For image B, the image is rotated vertically. They may skip count by 2 because they will be able to identify 2 groups.
And again, it has those lines through the 2 so that they'll be able to identify those groups of 2, hopefully.
Right.
But then pushing toward that array. We just anticipated what your students were going to say while we were doing the math flips. What questions do you think that you could ask to help get those responses?
For our first image, I'll ask students, how many do you see and how do you know?
Okay, and then how are we going to get them to see the connection between A and B?
I will ask them how they used A to help them connect to image B.
Also, I think comparing them and showing their differences will be very powerful here as well, to get them to think about the 2 times 6 versus the 6 times the 2.
They also discuss academic vocabulary that will be used throughout the lesson to promote communicating math ideas with precision. They are intentional to plan for opportunities to incorporate the mathematics teaching practices so that students are given opportunities to engage in the student mathematical practices.
What about vocabulary?
We'll use vocabulary like equal groups, arrays, product, factors, efficient, and justify.
Okay, and thinking about the word justify, thinking back to whenever we had their assessments, a lot of them did not justify their answers on that. How do you think that they feel about this word now?
I feel like we use justify as part of our everyday academic vocabulary within our math lessons.
Great. We know how important student discourse is in math talks. Let's be intentional about the talk moves that we're going to use on each flip, how we're going to help the students move from one to the next. So what do you think that you'll use in your first model for your A and B?
For this first math flip, I think using the rephrasing talk move is a good starting point for my students.
What do you think that is?
This will help show understanding of other students' strategies and discussions after they've had time to process the images.
What do you think your second talk move will be for the next image?
For the second math flip, I would like to use revoicing. This will just help clarify students' thoughts as we're discussing the image.
Okay, and what about for the third one? I know I always like to end with a turn and talk just so everybody has that chance to share their thoughts. What do you think?
I agree, a turning talk would be a great last math talk move for our flips. This will allow students to turn and talk with each other to discuss their findings and their thoughts on the images that they were viewing.
Also, having a possible sentence stem where they are using the word justify, or you could say something like, turn to your partner and start with this sentence stem. I can justify this answer because, and then they're having the use of the word justify themselves, and that's going to tie in that math practice standard number 3.
Great.
One of the decisions will be to select and sequence student strategies to help make connections to advance student thinking and support all students towards the learning goal. Following the activity, the teacher and coach will reflect and debrief on student evidence to consider what went well and determine next instructional steps to help students meet the intended learning goals. They may choose a related math flip to extend the conversation on the commutative property of multiplication in a new lesson. They may design a small group lesson that integrates hands-on learning to help students make the connection between the concrete and pictorial representations of multiplication and the commutative property. By collecting evidence of student learning, they can more effectively differentiate their plans based on what individual students know and what they need.
So now that we've planned most of the math flip, let's talk about the wrap-up.
To wrap the lesson up, I would ask the students what they've noticed about the problem sets that they've looked at. I would also love to find a way to highlight the commutative property.
Oh, that's a great idea. I think that by thinking about the images that they've already done in the math flip, relating that and maybe a true false, like 2 times 8 equals 8 times 2, that'll really push in on equality and that commutative property. Also having them to justify that. How do they know that? Because they just saw the images. So having that background should help them to be able to justify their reasoning.
Good. I think that's a great idea, and that will help them become more efficient when learning their facts.
Through their collaborative partnership, the coach and teacher plan opportunities for students to discover, make sense of, and use the commutative property of multiplication with visual models. By intentional planning and using student evidence to make instructional decisions, we are ensuring that learning is equitable, engaging, and effective for every student in every classroom every day.